On September 2nd, 2025, at 6:30 a.m., US surveillance screens glowed with a single, clear target: a speedboat from Venezuela racing across the Caribbean at full speed. Two brilliant white scars were left on the dark sea surface as its twin outboard engines raked at it. Armed members of the crew thought they were attempting another escape for their cartel bosses. It was fast, risky, but familiar to them. The fact that the ocean surrounding them was no longer open water was something they failed to understand. It had quietly transformed into a cage. The sky wasn't empty from above. American satellites were already aiming. Thermal sensors followed the boat's exhaust plume across the waves like a flaming arrow, while infrared scanners and electro-optical cameras sent every movement signal to command centers located thousands of miles away. In real time, analysts observed the smugglers tightening their throttles, believing they were evading doom. They were unaware that every wave they cut, radio pulse they released, and ounce of gasoline they used was being recorded and catalogued. Freedom was a myth. A US Navy P-8 Poseidon spy plane circled patiently at 25,000 feet. It would appear to most people to be a typical patrol jet. However, the Poseidon is much more than just wings and motors to those in uniform. It serves as a nerve center and a flying command post, extending the Navy's eyes and ears across hundreds of miles. Its ANAPY-10 radar used rain, clouds, and the sea as a searchlight to precisely map the boat's location. Even in the midst of tropical squalls, the smugglers were unable to conceal themselves. Every move they made was followed by the Poseidon, which changed direction whenever the speedboat zagged or zigged, keeping the target in its invisible crosshairs. And it went beyond merely observing. Poseidon listened. Every coded signal that the traffickers thought was secure was promptly picked up, and every encrypted radio burst sent them racing back toward Caracas. Their words had already been captured, decoded, and stored in US databases by the time they arrived in Venezuela. It was covert collaboration for the smugglers. It was live intelligence to the Navy. The next tier of the trap slipped gently into place on the horizon. A dim outline emerged, initially merely a speck merging with the mist. This was no fishing schooner, however. It was a 9,000-ton American steel destroyer of the Arleigh Burke class, armed with weapons, missiles, and sensors. Below its deck were 96 vertical launch cells that could fire anything from Tomahawk cruise missiles to surface-to-air interceptors. That kind of might seemed ridiculous against a small drug boat, like bringing a sledgehammer to crush an ant. However, the destroyer was not just armed. Its Spy-1 radar, which is a component of the Aegis combat system, was surreptitiously sending positional data into the vast network of the Navy, combining ships, satellites, and airplanes into one deadly web. That was the true meaning of encircled. An unseen web of surveillance and weaponry instead of a visible circle of ships on the water. Every escape route was already covered, regardless of the smugglers' direction of travel, north, south, or west toward Venezuelan waters. This is known as the kill box in Navy doctrine. The concept is painfully straightforward, despite the dramatic name. It becomes mathematically impossible to escape once a target enters a mapped sector, because overlapping layers of sensors and weapons converge. The Venezuelan boat had just stumbled into that reality. Satellites were doing more than just taking pictures from above. They were mapping the engine's hydrocarbon trails, monitoring heat signatures, and listening in on electronic conversations. Although 50 knots meant nothing in a battlespace connected at the speed of light, the smugglers believed that speed equated to safety. The Caribbean appeared vast and open to them. The Navy saw it as a chessboard where every move was predicted and every square was controlled. It wasn't a movie when the order came. There was no shouted command over radio waves, no dramatic pursuit. The target was confirmed by the Poseidon. The Combat Information Center of the destroyer acknowledged. Radars for fire control aligned. Additionally, precision fire turned fiberglass into flame in a single, crucial moment that the smugglers were unaware of. In a matter of seconds, the boat was gone, reduced to smoldering debris floating in the ocean. Regarding the U, the operation was a classic success, with no casualties, flawless execution, and no chance of escape, according to S commanders. There had never been hope for the men on that boat. From the moment they throttled up, the water they believed to be their freedom was turned into a cage. The Pentagon made the results public within hours. In the battle against opioids, Washington declared the strike a victory. They insisted that the target was a ship closely associated with Tren de Aragua, the most infamous criminal syndicate in Venezuela, rather than just another arbitrary smuggling craft. 11 suspected cartel members were killed in international waters, according to government officials. On social media, President Donald Trump emphasized the message by boasting that the strike demonstrated America's determination to go after cartel members wherever they operate. However, the response overseas was explosive, while Washington applauded. President Nicolás Maduro made an angry appearance on official television in Caracas, his fists clenched and his voice raised. He described the action as a clear act of aggression, a violation of Venezuelan sovereignty, and a violation of international law. 11 Venezuelans had been executed without a trial, he informed his audience. The strike quickly turned into a geopolitical firestorm, despite US officials portraying it as counter-narcotics. Analysts cautioned about risky precedents. What would prevent other powerful nations from sinking ships in international waters based solely on suspicion if one could assert this authority? The line between combat and law enforcement was becoming more hazy. However, the mission was more than a tactical success for the Navy. It was a harvest of intelligence. All of the smugglers' calls, routes, and equipment had been intercepted and registered. Radio voices were tagged so they could be identified later. Frequencies, call signs, timing patterns, all stored in databases. The Navy hadn't just erased a boat, it had mapped a slice of Tren de Aragua's logistical network. This is what militaries call pattern of life intelligence, the ability to predict future moves by analyzing behavior over time. It is priceless. And it didn't stop there. Just days later, Venezuelan F-16s screamed low over the USS Jason Dunham, another Arleigh Burke-class destroyer operating in international waters. The Pentagon condemned the flyby as reckless, but once again, the Navy quietly reaped a data windfall. Every radar ping from those aging fighters, every burst of radio chatter was vacuumed up and catalogued. Even hostile posturing becomes an opportunity when your true goal is information dominance. But escalation was a razor's edge. One misinterpreted radar lock, one accidental missile release, and a dangerous flyby could have ignited a shooting war. Washington responded not by retreating, but by reinforcing. 10 F-35 Lightning II stealth planes were sent to Puerto Rico within a week, which is only a 2-hour flight from Venezuelan airspace. This was not a symbolic act. In contrast to Venezuela's F-16s from the 1980s, America's F-35s were fifth-generation combat aircraft that were built to destroy defenses before enemies even knew they were being targeted. The message was clear. The United States was prepared to increase the stakes if Venezuela wanted to gamble in the skies. The hemisphere as a whole was affected. As American warships and combat patrols flooded the Caribbean, regional governments in Colombia, the Lesser Antilles, and elsewhere watched in trepidation. Tankers were rerouted by shipping companies. What started out as a single interdiction turned into a conflict between states, which alarmed diplomats. On the surface, the Caribbean appeared tranquil by the end of the first week of September, with blue waters, fishing boats, and commercial ships. Beneath that silence, however, the power dynamics had changed. Venezuela and the United States are in a dangerous standoff that some observers have dubbed a miniature version of the Cold War after one speedboat was destroyed. The ocean had always represented freedom to the smugglers, an endless horizon into which they could slip. It had turned into a testing ground for the US Navy. The silent cooperation of satellites, patrol planes, destroyers, and stealth fighters demonstrated that dramatic pursuits and last-minute alerts are no longer necessary in modern warfare. It depends on data, networks, and accuracy that leave little opportunity for error. It was never just a boat. It was a catalyst. Caracas saw the act as defiance wrapped in humiliation. Maduro could bang on podiums and his pilots could buzz American battleships. But that wouldn't change the fact that Venezuela's military was outclassed. Its equipment was decades behind, and its tactics were already copied from the United States. I'm curious to know how you see this conflict developing. Please hit like, subscribe, and join the fleet to directly support our channel if you enjoyed this in-depth analysis. Because, as this example shows, the house never loses when you wager against the US Navy.